Ever catch yourself reading about some ancient magical order, the ones claiming lineage way back to Atlantis, or maybe initiates of Moses?
Oh, yeah, it's a common theme, isn't it? These mystical traditions with these grand historical claims.
Totally. And you have to wonder, like, are we meant to take that literally as actual history? Or there may be something else going on?
Well, that's pretty much the core question we're digging into today. We got this really interesting text from one of you listeners about the concept of the egregore in modern magic. It's by someone called Frater U.D.
Right, the Egregore.
And it gets right into the power and the implications of those historical connections, whether they're actual fact or maybe more symbolic.
Exactly. Our listener really wanted to sort of get to the bottom of why these claims pop up so much, and what does it mean for people actually practicing magic today?
And the author of this piece, they start off a bit skeptical about the literal history part, but then they dive deep into belief itself and this idea of symbolic truth. It's fascinating.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive, then, is to unpack this egregore idea.
Yeah, figure out why these historical claims are so common in magic and what that tells us about how we see history, reality, especially through a magical lens.
Sort of a new way to look at claims that, let's be honest, sometimes get mocked a bit.
Precisely. Okay, so where does the author start? Well, they mention what they call the cheap joke element first.
Ah, right. Like those orders claiming really ancient links. I think they mentioned Amorcy.
Yeah, suggesting people like Socrates or even Ramses II were somehow, Rosicrucians.
Which sounds, well, a bit absurd on the surface, doesn't it?
It definitely can. And it highlights why people might ridicule it if you take it purely at face value.
But that's not the author's main point, is it?
No, not really. The interesting part, they argue, is when practitioners themselves start treating these claims like verifiable history. And that's where Marshall McLuhan comes in.
Oh, okay. McLuhan. Understanding media. That guy.
The very same. And his ideas about how our Western alphabet being linear has fundamentally shaped our thinking.
Made us think in straight lines. Past, present, future. Cause and effect.
Exactly. Reading left to right, line by line. It conditions us from childhood to process information sequentially. McLuhan contrasted this with what he called iconic thinking.
Which is more like?
More holistic. Like you see in cultures with pictographic writing, think ancient Egypt or China and Japan today. It's about seeing the whole pattern, the interconnectedness, not just the sequence.
So our linear bias makes us look for literal, historical chains of cause and effect.
That's the suggestion. It might explain why these magical orders feel the need to frame their lineage in a way that sounds like linear history, even if the real power lies elsewhere.
Interesting. And that connects to the whole analytic versus synthetic thinking thing in the West, too.
Right. And the author points out how synthetic now often means artificial or fake, thanks to, chemistry and plastics.
Right.
It's lost its older meaning of putting things together.
So how does magical thinking fit in? Is it different again?
Well, yeah, that's the argument. It operates differently. It's less focused on that strict A causes B linearity. It's more holistic. It looks at the whole process.
And it includes the observer.
Critically, yes. It strongly includes the observer's psychology, which, even modern physics touches on with things like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle or relativity, but still kind of struggles to fully embrace.
So for magic, it's less about the literal alphabetic historical fact.
And more about the feel of things, the underlying pattern, maybe. The author uses this great example, a shaman versus a meteorologist explaining rain.
Okay.
One talks about a weeping rain goddess. The other talks about, falling barometric pressure.
Totally different languages. Myth versus science, sort of.
Exactly. But for the average person who isn't an expert in either mythology or meteorology, both explanations are pretty abstract, right? You have to take their word for it.
Mm-hmm. You trust the authority.
Right. And the author argues that scientific terms like barometric pressure can be just as abstract, just as kind of mythic in their own way, if you don't truly understand the mechanics behind them.
So both are giving you a framework to understand something complex.
Precisely. And belief is key to accepting either one. But there's a crucial difference the author highlights.
Which is?
It connects to the unconscious mind. He brings in Austin Osman Spare, and also Freud and Jung, naturally. The idea is that magic often stems from the subconscious or unconscious.
And the unconscious thinks differently, right? More in pictures.
Exactly. It thinks in symbols, images, feelings, not linear arguments. So if that's true,
Then the shaman's explanation, the weeping goddess.
while maybe not literally true in a scientific sense, might actually align better with how our unconscious perceives reality. It resonates on that symbolic level.
Making it feel more natural.
Yeah.
Or maybe healthier for us psychologically.
Yeah, the author suggests something like that may be more ecological and holistic for our inner world, our psychic hygiene.
I like the aside about trying to stop rain versus making it rain.
Oh yeah, that was good. You might try influencing a rain goddess through ritual or trance.
But good luck trying to bargain with barometric pressure using a magic wand.
Exactly. It makes a kind of practical, magical sense within that worldview. You work with the forces you can potentially interact with.
Okay, so this leads towards Rupert Sheldrake.
It does. His theory of morphogenetic fields or morphic resonance, and the author notes the rather strong reaction it got, not just from scientists.
But from some occultists, too. That seems weird.
You'd think. Because Sheldrake's idea isn't that far off from older concepts like the zeitgeist, you know?
The spirit of the times. That sense that ideas are just in the air, leading to similar discoveries happening independently.
Right, that feeling of a collective field influencing things. But the author suggests Sheldrake might be seen as doing what the meteorologist did.
Replacing the mythic language.
Kind of, replacing it with what the author calls cryptomythic scientific-sounding terms. And the scientific establishment reacted very defensively.
Worried about their terms being used in the wrong context, maybe.
Yeah.
Devalued.
That seems to be part of it. Fear of diluting the authority of scientific language, but the fact that some occultists also reacted negatively.
What does that suggest?
Well, the author thinks it shows how even people within occult traditions can sometimes become disconnected from the underlying principles of symbolic or holistic thinking. They get caught up in the literal versus non-literal debate, too.
Which brings us back to how we view reality itself. The author says something like, reality is the reality of its description.
Yeah, a powerful idea. That we're constantly constructing our reality, our space-time continuum, through the descriptions and stories we tell ourselves and each other.
We're always kind of reinventing the past, present, and future.
Think about it. Space feels solid, physical, but time feels much more fluid, more abstract. Even people who aren't into magic often talk about time being an illusion.
Right. And the author uses Orwell's 1984 here, doesn't he?
Yeah, as a stark illustration, history in 1984 is just the description of history. Whoever controls the records controls the past.
Who controls the past controls the future.
Who controls the present controls the past.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this ties into a deep-seated desire in Western culture for order out of chaos, ordo ab chao. We don't always like instability or impermanence.
The idea that things change, that nothing is fixed, it can be uncomfortable.
Very. So if past, present, and future are subjective and fluid, at least to some degree,
Then the magician has some wiggle room, some freedom to work with them.
that's the proposition. The magician becomes, in a sense, like the figure on the tarot card, the magician, or sometimes the juggler, a creator of their own universe, a master of illusion.
But you're saying this freedom, this ability to choose your history, isn't always fully used.
Often not, it seems. Perhaps, as the author hints, there's a need for some stability in everyday life, even for those dealing with really unorthodox states of mind. A grounding wire, maybe.
Okay, so back to the bogus claims to antiquity.
Right. The core issue. Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, Theosophy, OTO, Golden Dawn. Lots of orders.
And they invoke all these figures and myths. Atlantis, Moses, Solomon.
Dr. Faustus, Saint Germain, Gnostics, Knights Templar, the Holy Grail. It's a long list.
A real greatest hits of esoteric history and legend.
It really is. And the author draws a little parallel here, suggesting it's maybe a bit like shamans talking about the good old days. Perhaps partly just a human tendency, maybe more common as people get older, to romanticize the past.
But there's more to it than just nostalgia, right?
Yeah.
This is where the Egregore comes in properly.
This is the absolute crux of it. The author argues that by invoking these names, these lineages, the magician isn't just making a historical claim or telling a story, they are actively
Summoning something.
summoning up the egregore of those entities, tapping into their collective energy, their power, their limitations, or, in Sheldrake's language, connecting with their morphic field.
So the Egregore is like a collective thought form, built up by belief over time.
Essentially, yes. An autonomous psychic entity created and fed by the shared beliefs and focused energy of a group, centered around an idea or figure.
Wow. Okay, so by claiming lineage from, say, the Knights Templar.
You're not just saying we're like them, you're potentially plugging into the egregore of the Knights Templar with all the associated power and symbolism built up around them over centuries.
And deliberately ignoring the historical contradictions is part of that process.
It seems to be. The author suggests the magician, in doing this, acts almost like a god, choosing their spiritual ancestry, effectively rewriting the objective past for their own purposes.
Which is something even the traditional Judeo-Christian God isn't usually described as changing the past.
Right. It's a radical kind of freedom. And this whole process, this creative historicism,
It speaks directly to the unconscious.
very strongly, it gives it that symbolic lineage, that ideological backup, bypassing the conscious mind's hang-ups about objective proof.
But the key is not to get confused.
Absolutely crucial. Don't mistake the mythic, symbolic truth that works on the unconscious plane for literal, objective, linear history. That's where problems can start confusing the planes of reference.
Okay, so summing up, these claims to ancient roots in magic, maybe not about history books at all.
Probably not, in most cases. It's more likely a technique, maybe conscious, maybe not, for tapping into the power of collective belief, these potent symbolic archetypes, the egregore.
A kind of psychic shortcut to a reservoir of power and meaning.
Well put. Yeah.
So for you listening, understand this gives you a different lens, right? You don't have to just accept these claims blindly or dismiss them entirely either.
Exactly. You can see the potential psychological power, the symbolic weight, even if the history is questionable. It helps understand why these narratives persist and how they function.
You get a framework for engaging with them more critically, but also maybe more deeply.
Mm-hmm. And maybe a final thought to leave you with?
Cool.
Consider how the stories and figures we all believe in collectively, even outside of obvious magic. Think politics, national myths, cultural icons.
How might they be shaping our present, influencing our future?
Yeah. What egregores are we all participating in, maybe without even realizing it, and what does that mean?
Definitely something to chew on. A fascinating way to look at how belief shapes reality.